CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories this hour. Russia's edging towards war with the Ukraine, says the US, after a massive cyber attack cripples Ukrainian websites. Residents flee as tsunami waves hit the Pacific island of Tonga following a giant underwater volcanic eruption. Party people a week of damaging revelations leave Boris Johnson worried for his job. And detained again. Can Novak Djokovic stay in Melbourne to compete in the Australian Open? He awaits a court hearing. Washington has again warned that Moscow is planning to invade Ukraine after a week of diplomatic talks to solve the crisis in the region failed to make progress. The White House claims Russia's preparing to stage a so-called false flag event on the country's eastern border to justify military intervention by its troops. Meanwhile, several government websites in Ukraine have been returning to service after a cyber attack on Friday, which has been blamed on Russian state-backed hackers. Well, let's join Guy Henderson, who's in Kiev for us. Guy, talk us through these latest claims coming from the United States.
Well, on Friday, the White House said that its military analysts had been telling it that Russia may have put in place a team whose mission would be to carry out a false flag attack, essentially an attack which would be aimed or either directly against their own side or those supporting them, perhaps a sabotage attack of some sort, which would then be blamed on Ukraine and then used as a pretext for Russia to potentially invade or escalate its military options in eastern Ukraine. Perhaps almost needless to say, we heard a pretty swift response from the Kremlin in Moscow. Dmitry Peskov calling those claims unfounded, calling the media reports around them unfounded, according to the TASS news agency. But the United States is definitely trying to press home the message now that it believes that Russia is setting the stage to escalate and potentially go to war with Ukraine. We also heard from Victoria Newman, speaking to the Financial Times newspaper, talking about how this was all part of a playbook they'd seen before with Russia, where they provoke certain events, which then gives them the excuse to escalate things.
It's all pretty tense, guys, certainly from the United States and from Russia's point of view. What's the response been in the Ukraine itself?
Perhaps a slightly different take here still on the ground. You speak to a lot of just normal people running businesses on the street and so on, and a lot of them still do voice doubts and scepticism about whether a full-scale invasion really is a realistic or likely option for Russia into Ukraine, at least for the time being. We were actually in the Foreign Ministry, the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, here in Kiev on Friday, just a few hours after this, what was described as a massive cyber attack was launched, not just against that ministry, but several others as well. As you say, some of the websites that were affected, some of the government websites, are now heading back towards being in service again. But we spoke to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine in that building, and she seemed to express maybe only some faint hope that there may still be a small window for diplomacy, even if it was only going to last a few days.
Amid all the talk of conflict, a song for unity, marking Orthodox New Year. This is an event being hosted inside Ukraine's foreign ministry, just hours after it became the target of a cyber attack. Deputy Foreign Minister Emin Zaparova is here too. Behind the scenes, investigators are scrambling to find out more. Front of house, though, all seems calm.
Ukraine's government may have been rattled by this attack, but in
are trying to show they can carry on as normal. There's also no confirmation yet on who might have been responsible. At this stage, Zaporova will say only that if it is Russia, that would fit a pattern.
Without going into this conspirology theory or without, guessing, those attacks that we used to have, they were a part of this hybrid warfare, which is about thwarting Ukrainian society from within, which is about spreading false narratives about Ukraine as a failed state.
The diplomacy, she says, may not be entirely dead yet.
This week was quite intensive in terms of the developments and conversations and a dialogue, and I think that the next week will be even a bit more pivotal in terms of the possible assessments.
If this is the start of something more significant, though, questions about Ukraine's often relatively youthful new order may soon be answered. Oleg Dunda is an MP from President Volodymyr Zelensky's party.
There are some who worry that if war comes, if there is a serious crisis, whether this government has the experience to handle that crisis.
The multiple crises we have here in Ukraine are similar to those faced by the EU, which also suffers from the gas supply crisis and the security crisis. Ukraine does not ride out these crises any worse than the EU.
This attack may not be what it seems, and the damage appears limited. This is a spokesperson from Ukraine's security service, saying most affected sites have already been restored. The Defence Ministry and National Security Council were also amongst those hit. But as much as the Ukrainian public and those in charge try to keep calm and carry on, they know something far more devastating could be soon to come.
Something that I think a lot of people here assume, given past precedents, would involve trying to destabilise Ukraine and its government in some way. But I think there is still a great deal of uncertainty about exactly what that next move might be.
Huge uncertainty. Guy Henderson in Kiev, thank you very much. A tsunami advisory has been issued for Hawaii and parts of the US Pacific coast. This comes hours after Tonga was left reeling in the aftermath of a tsunami after a massive underwater volcano eruption, which could be seen from space. Now, it sent people fleeing as it swamped the Pacific island. Charlotte Parsons reports.
It began with this, an underwater volcanic eruption, powerful enough to send plumes of smoke and ash 20 kilometers into the sky. What came next was this. A tsunami hit the Pacific island of Tonga, crashing through streets and homes, sending residents scrambling for higher ground. A choir group was said to have been practicing in this church right before the water came flooding in. Locals describe ash falling like rain on Tonga's capital, which lies just 65 kilometers north of the volcano. The 8-minute eruption was so violent it sounded like thunder in Fiji, more than 800 kilometers away. So far, there are no reports of casualties, and the full scale of the damage has yet to be revealed. The volcano was declared dormant just a few days ago, but today it showed itself to be anything but. Charlotte Parsons, CGTN.
The UK's Prime Minister is facing public anger and calls to resign after a week of scandals that have battered his premiership. Allies of Boris Johnson insist he's the right man to lead the country, despite a string of controversies in recent months that forced him to publicly apologise this week. Let's speak to our correspondent, Naweed Jabarkil. Naweed, talk about the pressure building on Boris Johnson.
Yeah, and it seems to be coming from all sorts of directions at the moment. Let's start with the opposition. The Labour Party, its leader Keir Starmer, reiterating his calls on Saturday, saying that it was time for the Prime Minister to leave office. Perhaps not that surprising. There's a lot of public anger over what's happened as well, because it seems day after day in recent weeks there have been fresh scandals about what the Prime Minister has known potentially about these parties going on mainly at his official residence. The latest suggestion in the last 24 hours, reported reports that early on in the pandemic, the Prime Minister and his wife, Carrie Johnson, now may have visited his official country residence of Chequers when they shouldn't have. Downing Street responding to that and saying there was no wrongdoing. That's something that we've heard time and time again. But what's changed really in the last few days is an acceptance by the Prime Minister that some of these illegal parties did take place. He apologised publicly in Parliament earlier this week. And really the bigger concern for him moving forward is what Conservative colleagues of his may do. That's the party that he heads at the moment. We've been hearing from some of the lawmakers in the party, one of them who used to be a defence minister of the UK, Tobias Ellwood, saying that the Prime Minister needed to either lead or step aside. Others have gone further, like the likes of Andrew Bridgen, who says that the Prime Minister doesn't currently have the moral authority to lead the United Kingdom, particularly during this pandemic. He's one of 5 Conservative members of Parliament who've now written to the party saying that they want a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. That's far, far short of the numbers needed to try and trigger one of those votes. It's 54, so still a long, long way away. It seems that what this has all done for the Prime Minister is put him and his position in a very, very perilous position.
Party after party after party. This has been the worst week of Boris Johnson's political life. The Prime Minister's back is firmly against the wall now, following a series of illegal get-togethers at his official residence over the past 2 years, while the rest of the country was in lockdown and thousands dying from COVID-19.
Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want or to do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and with the government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules.
So far, Johnson has the support of his cabinet. Many ministers have publicly backed him. But watching on from a grassroots level, lawmakers from his ruling Conservative Party say they've received hundreds of complaints about the way Downing Street is being run. A snapshot of wider public anger at the hypocrisy from the highest office in the land.
No, he has to go, yeah, 100% he has to go. The apology was half-hearted. It even seemed to intimate that in his mind he seemed to believe that perhaps the rules were not broken and the guidance was followed, which is just inconceivable.
Unsurprised, disappointed, let down, they're my immediate thoughts. And then I probably think that's probably endemic of what this government are about, what they believe in, how they treat the general public.
We get what we deserve. If we're going to elect this kind of lunatics to the highest offices of this country, then this is the result we should expect.
Outside Downing Street, others took a lighter look at the situation, mocking the Prime Minister's claims he didn't know he was at a party he attended in May 2020, organised by one of his closest advisers in his own house. Despite the intense pressure, the police say they won't investigate whether lockdown rules were broken because they were in the past. And with a healthy majority in Parliament and the next general election not due until 2024, it's not the public but his own colleagues who can ultimately choose to unseat Johnson. At the moment, that appears a gamble not enough of them are willing to take.
Boris Johnson might be about to face the political fight of his life, but let's talk more about the fight against COVID, because reports suggest Johnson's ready to lift those Plan B restrictions.
Yeah, and for many people, these two issues are very closely related, because he is the man leading the fight against the pandemic, and the buck ultimately, according to him, stops with the top job. In terms of what happens now in England, Plan B measures currently in place until the 26th of January, according to the Telegraph newspaper. Those restrictions will no longer remain in place after then. An announcement on that could be made as soon as in the next few days, we understand. But looking at where the rest of the UK stands, Scotland and Wales, they brought in restrictions after Christmas. England resisted the temptation to do that, and and Boris Johnson actually won a lot of plaudits for his decision for so-called holding his nerve, as a lot of his Conservative colleagues say. So the pandemic really is going to be key in terms of what happens for him personally as well in the next few weeks, next few months potentially, if he lasts that long. Scotland and Wales are set to relax some rules as well, particularly around large indoor events, outdoor events as well. For Plan B in England, it includes things like wearing masks in public places as well as working from home. And there is a warning from scientists, some of those advising the governments that if these restrictions are lifted too soon, particularly at the moment when infections here, COVID-19 numbers, case numbers are still near record highs, that could be dangerous for how the UK fights this virus. But just lastly, in terms of Boris Johnson, I think he'll be desperate to get back as soon as possible to focusing on the pandemic, because what's happened in the last few days has been a big distraction, and it's left him in this position politically.
Huge distraction, and we haven't heard the end of it. Nuija Barkil in London, thank you very much. Still ahead here on CGTN. Pandemic or endemic? We'll hear why, despite record cases and increasing hospitalisations, Spain's government is eager to reclassify COVID.
Beijing, China's capital and its cultural nerve center. A modern metropolis with traditional roots. And now it becomes the first city in the world to host both Summer and Winter Olympics. After 14 years, the biggest sporting extravaganza returns to Beijing. Thousands of athletes from around the globe will compete in over 100 events at 3 zones. Cheered on by over 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and millions abroad. CGTN will bring you a ringside view of the historic event. 2022 Beijing Olympics, the games that matter, on CGTN. See the difference.
Coming up on this week's Razor, we meet the British family who are leading the way in sustainable mussel farming, which can not only help feed growing populations, but also help the environment in the process.
Growing trees or seaweed or whatever else you want that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, but it releases it pretty quickly. With mussel shells or any other bivalve shell, it's millions of years, so we're taking it out of circulation.
Welcome back. Tennis world number one Novak Djokovic has been sent back to an immigration detention hotel in Australia as he waits for a court to decide if he should be deported. The Serbian's visa has been revoked for a second time due to COVID-19 travel rules. His lawyers are appealing, with the hearing set for Sunday, just a day before Djokovic is due to be playing in the Australian Open. Greg Navarro has more.
Well, it's been another busy day. Now, Novak Djokovic's lawyers did appear before a judge briefly. It's a procedural hearing to figure out how their case in challenging the government's decision to cancel his visa for a second time will go ahead. All parties involved agree that a hearing will take place a Sunday morning here Australian time. Djokovic currently does not have a valid visa to be in this country. Now, this morning he was allowed to spend a few hours in his attorney's offices, but at this point is in detention. According to some documents from the immigration minister, apparently he believed that Novak Djokovic did in fact contract COVID last month, and there were some questions about the validity and the timing of all that. For him, the immigration minister, the problem was a health safety issue. In fact, Djokovic's lawyers say that that's ridiculous. They're prepared to argue against it. They're also prepared to argue that Djokovic is a hugely popular tennis player, even in Australia, and that people want him to play, and that's one of the reasons why he should play. Now that saga has become very much a political issue here. Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, getting behind it. However, the opposition leader was saying that the government has been using this as a smokescreen to take away from some of the real problems in this country at the moment surrounding COVID.
Greg Navarro reporting. Shops, hairdressers and gyms have been opening in the Netherlands as the country eases out of one of the toughest lockdowns in Europe. But bars, restaurants and other public places will stay closed for at least another 10 days. New COVID cases are running at a record high of 30,000 a day. However, hospitalisation levels have fallen across the country as vaccine booster rollouts continue. There are protests taking place in Paris against a controversial new COVID pass. The new measure came into effect in France on Saturday and requires residents to be triple jabbed to qualify for a COVID pass. It's estimated then that 500,000 people will now find that their current health pass for being double jabbed is no longer valid. Spain has seen record COVID infection rates in recent weeks, and the health service has been under pressure with increased hospitalisations. The government has regulated the price of antigen tests so the public can test more often, but it's also come under criticism for plans to reclassify the status of the pandemic. Rahul Pathak reports.
This week, Spain recorded the largest number of daily deaths since March last year, although the figures are still much lower than at the height of the pandemic. The new Omicron variant has, like much of Europe, torn through the population, and this highly transmissible strain has put increased pressure on those providing healthcare.
We have worked for 2 years without any rest. A colleague told me today that he had requested leave many months ago. When he was finally granted permission to take a few days off, he was immediately called back to work. It's because so many of his colleagues have been infected and so couldn't come in.
Infection rates soared across Spain after the festive period. This week, the Health Ministry reported the largest ever daily total for coronavirus infections since the pandemic began. Regions in the north, such as the Basque Country and Catalonia, have been particularly badly hit. Now, it's been a little over 6 weeks since Spain recorded its first case of the Omicron variant. Since then, it's reported record cases of infections. The government's saying that the virus is something that we're going to have to live with from now on. And it's also suggested that they adjust the way they measure COVID, preferring a system similar to that used for the flu. The new proposals have not been without their critics. The World Health Organization has said it's too early to make the adjustment from a pandemic to an endemic illness such as influenza. Those who support Pedro Sanchez's plan believe that the potential for serious illness with this new variant has been reduced, largely due to the successful vaccination campaign, but there are exceptions.
Undoubtedly, vaccination has helped a lot. We have a lot of old people with comorbidities. Even if Omicron is less aggressive, it can produce a destabilization of the other diseases and produce serious illness. But the vaccine has made a lot of differences.
The next few weeks will determine just how quickly Spain recovers from this sixth wave of the pandemic, but the government hopes that the country, nearly 2 years on, will eventually learn to live with the virus. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Singapore is barring unvaccinated people from returning to their workplace from today, even if they have a negative COVID test. The measure will affect nearly 48,000 people in the city-state. CGTN's Miro Liu spoke to one of them.
If you are unvaccinated by choice in Singapore, you can no longer physically return to your workplace. This is the latest mandate by the Singapore government as it prepares to tackle the more transmissible Omicron variant.
As part of the new vaccine differentiated measures, authorities here in Singapore have asked employers to reassign their unvaccinated workers to jobs that can be done from home. If that's not possible, these workers could be placed on no-pay leave or even lose their jobs.
Jamie Wan is a co-founder and head coach of Ignite Tennis Academy and is amongst the 48,000 workers who have chosen not to receive COVID-19 vaccine.
I do have my personal reasons for not vaccinating. That does not mean in any way that I'm against vaccination. In fact, I feel that especially the older generation should get vaccinated.
With livelihoods at stake, Jamie has launched an online petition seeking a removal or recalibration of the government's approach.
My personal view is that I'm not sure if a blanket statement across all industries and all age groups in terms of not allowing people to go back to the workplace is really necessary, and again, is it really reasonable to deprive someone of their livelihood?
With 87% of Singapore's population fully vaccinated, Jamie is also questioning the need to tighten the measures at this juncture.
Given that the society is already so highly vaccinated, is there a necessity to take away jobs and livelihoods of a very small percentage of people who may or may not pose a risk to the healthcare system?
Addressing concerns raised by residents like Jamie and the opposition party MPs, the government has highlighted that 2/3 of ICU beds are occupied by the unvaccinated. And although a small proportion of the population, they do take up a disproportionate amount of medical resources and add to hospital workload. The latest restrictions are part of a series of vaccine-differentiated measures that the city-state has rolled out over the past few months, which include restricting entry into malls or dining in at eateries. While vaccinations are still voluntary, it is certainly getting increasingly difficult for the unvaccinated to live a normal life in the city-state. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
Admiring ancient Chinese imperial buildings while skating. Like the sound of that? Well, it's one of the attractions visitors to Beijing can experience as the city's largest natural ice rink opened this week. And it comes as the capital gets ready for the upcoming Winter Games. CGTN's Lu Ray talked to some skaters.
Summer Palace Kunming Lake Ice Rink, the biggest natural ice rink in Beijing, has reopened. Thousands gather here to enjoy the winter vibes every day and embrace the Olympic season.
We're so happy. We have been doing this for 3 hours today. This reminds us of our childhood. In my county, we used to do this in the river in front of our house or just in the streets.
I'm from Shanghai. I heard about this rink a long time ago and I always wanted to come. It's fun to play here. In fact, a few days ago, I heard the temperature in Beijing was rising, so I was worried the rink would not be open when I get here. I told my friend if it's not open, I would spend the whole day crying at the gate.
Summer Palace was a summer resort for the emperors in Qing Dynasty. It's still the most famous imperial garden in China. The Kunming Lake Ice Rink was built within the palace in 2016. Last year, it was closed due to the pandemic. Now it's back with COVID prevention measures as a reminder of what the city felt like this time of the year.
We're still a little bit worried about the pandemic, but we believe difficult times will eventually pass if we stay cautious. Also, I want to tell the Olympians to perform well and take good care of themselves.
China has so far built more than 600 standard ice rinks nationwide. That's 4 times more compared to 2015, when Beijing was elected as the host city for 2022 Winter Games. China also says its goal of engaging 300 million people in winter sports has already been achieved.
The pandemic has paled people's lives for 2 years. But with the Winter Olympic Games fast approaching, Beijing is abuzz with the Olympic spirits. People may not have a clue when the pandemic is going to over, but in the next couple of weeks, their lives are gonna dot it with joyful colors brought by the sports event. Lu Ray, CGTN, Beijing.
Looks like fun. Our top stories again. Russia is edging towards war with Ukraine, says the United States, after a massive cyber attack cripples Ukrainian websites. Residents flee as tsunami waves hit the Pacific island of Tonga following a giant underwater volcanic eruption. Tsunami warnings are issued for Hawaii and parts of the US Pacific coast. And detained again, can Novak Djokovic stay in Melbourne to compete in the Australian Open? He awaits a court hearing. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. Here in the UK as well, UK 24 hours a day on Freeview. Now there'll be more news coming up at the top of the hour, but next it's the agenda with Stephen Cole. For now, and from all the team here in London, goodbye.